Order. Pledge allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Mayor Larkey.
Here.
Councilmember White. Councilmember Powell.
Here.
Councilmember Pryan.
Here.
Councilmember Kraft.
Here.
Councilmember McCallum. Councilmember Goff.
Here.
Councilmember Lawson.
Here.
Councilmember Richardson.
Here.
We have a quorum. Budget work session. You go first.
I'll go first. Mr. Mayor and Council, tonight we have prepared for you two parts to this budget workshop. The first, we're going to briefly go through the services priority results based on the exercise that you all went through to kind of give rating scores to each of the areas that were identified, and then prioritizing each of those areas, then identifying what your specific awards might need. And so we'll go through that first to get things started. And then after that, Casey's going to take over and talk about some of the operational budget items and where those budgets stand as of right now. Just a reminder that this says draft. If you saw that first slide, it's a draft. We're still working on this process. This is designed to be a conversation to get your feedback, to see how things are progressing from your perspective, give you a high-level view of where we are and some of the major things that might be different from one year to the next, and then to incorporate your feedback into a more final document. Not the final document necessarily, but hopefully it's the final document when I do my proposed budget coming up at the end of February. And once that happens, of course, you guys can amend at any point, but the hope is to have most of the budget dialed in by that point. And so let's have as frank and open, as free a discussion as you want. Obviously, not that you don't always anyway, but there won't be any hard feelings in here right now because we're still in the draft phase of this, and this is kind of your chance to give us that feedback on where you think we're doing things well and where we're not. Okay. So let's start with the prioritization. We'll go back if you don't mind. Overview today, we're going to talk about the priorities, talk about budget assumptions. We'll talk about the general fund revenue and expenses, a very brief glossing over of parks revenue expenses. Talk a little bit about hotel motel, which we're kind of transitioning into calling an economic development fund instead of just hotel motel, because that's kind of what it is. Streets, wastewater, water, golf, other funds, and then general fund capital. Okay, so we're going to kind of hit that a little bit. The general fund capital, we're not going to spend too much time on because we had a capital budgeting workshop already. But as we've dialed in the operational budget, we've taken the initial asks that were presented during the capital workshop, and some of those things are still in there. Some of those things we've taken out. Because obviously just because we asked for it doesn't mean we have the money to do everything we wanted to do. And so we'll go over what exists in the current budget as it sits and what things that were presented before that are no longer in there, so you guys at least have an understanding of what that is. Okay? All right, let's move forward, please. So the council budget priorities, there's 4 different things here that you guys have at your desk. There are 2 of these services priority worksheet results handouts. They are different. One of them has approvals on the top and one of them has rankings on the top. So you'll notice that. So we'll go over the approval ratings first. We'll go over the priority rankings second. And then we'll get into this third document that I've handed you that has like some yellow highlights on it, where we've taken essentially the approval rankings and the priority rankings and kind of tried to combine them into a usable priority list essentially. And then we'll just briefly go through the ward needs discussion or tabulation page at the very end. And then we'll get into the actual numbers. All right. So let's start with the services priority worksheet results. Again, this was, if you'll recall, we had a list of things in different departments, and we are asking you to rate them from 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest score. And so we have the approval scores here. and we came up with an aggregate average score for each of the things so we could rank them accordingly, and these have been reordered to rank them from highest scoring to lowest scoring. So the highest scoring, for instance, if you look at the public works, the highest scoring thing is water, sewer infrastructure, emergency response. Got an average score of 4 out of 5, and the lowest scoring would be sidewalk improvements and maintenance, an average score of 1.57 out of 5. Okay, so that's how you would read this. Fires next, police, BEMA, community development, economic development, and other areas. Other areas is kind of just an aggregate of some other things. This wasn't necessarily meant to be an all-encompassing list of services. I think if we were to try to do something like that, we would have been there all day looking at different little things, but it just hitting things at a high level. So for instance, if you want to go through this a little bit, the highest things for public works: water, sewer infrastructure, emergency response, snow removal, water infrastructure, sewer infrastructure, maintenance, event support. Those were the highest scoring areas. The lowest, obviously, I talked about sidewalk improvements and maintenance, stormwater infrastructure, and neighborhood street improvements were the three that scored under 3 as an aggregate score. Moving to fire scores were really high, and that's generally usually the case. Training and updated best practices as far as fire response was ranked highest. EMS response was ranked second, and equipment and vehicles was ranked third. And on the bottom end, EMS transfers was ranked the lowest, but even at a 3.43, that's not a low score specifically, so make sure you take these in context. Community outreach education for fire prevention is 3.71. Again, not a low score, just was the lowest of the things that were identified on this list. Going into police, we had critical incident response as the highest, 4.43, event support at 4, and then the lowest was animal control at 3, commercial theft and loss prevention at 3.29. And I would hope and guess that our added animal control officer and resources that we've implemented in that area should hopefully affect that moving forward. But that obviously probably isn't well represented here, because I was asking you at the time to give me a rating of how we're doing or how we've been doing. And that animal control, that second officer, is kind of a newer thing that's just kind of gotten off the ground, and I know that we've literally just changed that scheduling recently, and that just went out, how we're going through the 12-hour shifts and trying to provide as much coverage as possible with that. Moving to BEMA, there are only a few things here that identified for BEMA: event support, incident response, and community preparedness, and those are the three in that order, and you see the scores there. Going to community development, we have zoning and building inspections is the highest, 3.71 each, and the lowest was code enforcement at 2.86. Economic development, multifamily residential development was the highest rated at 3.71. Retail recruitment and infill development were next, and then at the bottom end, new single-family residential neighborhoods was the lowest scoring. North Scott redevelopment and downtown redevelopment were the next two. Professional services, recruitment, and tourism were also around the same area. So, other areas, parks scored very high. Golf course scored very high. Senior friendliness and family friendliness had solid scores. But at the bottom end, we had alternative transportation options, not very well scoring. Public transit, obviously, those are things we don't really have a lot of. Arts and public arts, again, these are things that it's not a shock. We don't have a lot of those, so those scored pretty low. And then the homelessness was the fourth lowest.
Quick question. The
Yes.
7, that's 7 out of 9 of us completed the survey?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
I don't remember who was gone, but yeah.
Yeah, that is correct. 7 out of 9 completed it. So, all right. So if you want, why don't we move forward? But obviously you have this at your disposal, so you can peruse that. That's all the data. So we didn't change any of the data or leave any out. This is literally all the data on that first sheet. Second sheet, same thing, except this is more of a prioritization or kind of a ranking, within the department, right? So we asked you to rate those as far as the highest priority to the lowest priority. So here a lower score is actually better, right? Because if you rank 1, then that's the highest ranking of the services in terms of your interpretation of what should be the highest priority for that department, okay? And so when you go to the public works, the highest ranked was water, sewer, infrastructure, emergency response. And then neighborhood street maintenance was second. Sidewalk improvements maintenance was third. Water infrastructure, sewer infrastructure maintenance was fourth, and so on and so forth. At the bottom end was snow removal and event support. Okay. Under fire, EMS response was number 1. Training and updated best practices for fire response was number 2. Equipment and vehicles number 3. And then at the bottom of the lowest prioritization was event support, and then community outreach, education / fire prevention. Okay. Under police, we had neighborhood crime as a top priority. Critical incident response is number 2, and traffic enforcement number 3. And at the bottom end, we had event support, and then the jail, and then commercial theft loss prevention as the bottom 3 priorities. Under BEMA, incident response was considered the top priority there. Community preparedness second, and those were scored. If you look at the scores, those were very closely aligned. And then event support was the third. Move forward to community development. We had code enforcement was number 1, priority, planning number 2, and then zoning number 3. Rental inspections tied for third. Developer friendliness again and tied for third, and then that left building inspections at the bottom of the prioritization list. Under economic development, new single-family residential neighborhoods was the top priority. Downtown redevelopment number 2, North Scott redevelopment number 3. And so on and so forth. The lowest priority identified was infill development, and then professional services recruitment were the lowest 2. Then in other areas, and this is kind of an unfair way to look at this because all those other areas aren't necessarily related, but we had to do it some way. And customer service was number 1. Quality of life amenities number 2. Public communication was number 3. And then going down to the bottom, our last priority or lowest priority were tied between public transit and alternative transportation options. So does everybody understand how to read this and kind of what we were trying to accomplish here, at least from a high level? Any questions? Glad to answer any that we may have. Let's get through the next page, and then you may still have some questions, and maybe it'll answer some of the things you might be thinking of. If that works. Next one is this one with the highlights on it. So what we tried to do here is we tried to go look at essentially our approval scores and our rankings, and try to come up with what might be the highest priorities based on approvals and based on what you thought were the highest priority yourselves. And for instance, like water and sewer infrastructure emergency response had the highest approval rating, but it also was considered under public works, the highest priority, right? And so for public works, that's a good thing. Looks like the thing that we have the highest priority on was scoring the best, or one of the best, right? And so that's I wanted to highlight that specifically. The lowest approvals, however, if you go back to is sidewalk improvement maintenance. And then that was the lowest approval, but when you go back to where that ranked under your service priorities, it was number 3. So it was a high priority, but it had a low rating. So as a council, that's the one thing we probably ought to look at. As a staff, that's something that we probably ought to look at. It's a high priority. It's got a low rating. That's something we need to try to figure out how to fix. And that's not a shock. When we went out to the public and did all of our ward engagements over the past 2 years for budgeting, sidewalks has been a top priority for so long. I mean, and that's why, obviously, you guys approved the placing on the ballot of the use tax and the allocation of the funds from that, or at least half the funds from that, if it were to pass, to go toward that very issue, right? And so I feel very comfortable that that's a good tentative plan for now, and we'll just see how the use tax rolls, if it's successful or not. And if it's not, then we'll have to regroup and try to figure something else out. But at least we have a potential plan in place should the community decide that that's what they want to do, is to fund that. Okay. Fire training and updated best practices for response was a high approval. EMS response was a high approval. And if you go to the fire service priority worksheet, which was the second one, EMS response was the highest, the highest priority. And then training and updated best practices was the second highest priority. So I think it's safe for us to say that when it comes to our priorities, we're performing pretty well from a fire perspective. If that's how I would read that. do you follow along with the logic here and what we're trying to identify here? Trying to identify the needs and what we're doing well and what we're not. And so you move forward. Again, lowest approvals on fire was EMS transfers, and that wasn't considered, that was a lower priority on our list. It was 5th out of 7. So obviously that's something we need to look at as well. Going to police, critical incident response ranked highly in terms of approval. And if you go to the police priority worksheet, critical incident response was number 2 on our priority list, so that's a high priority for us, right? But it seems like we're doing well there. However, one thing that didn't get a high approval rating necessarily, or at least not at the top of the list, was neighborhood crime. And yet if you look at our prioritization sheet, neighborhood crime was the top priority according to the council. And so that's something we probably ought to look at, right? I mean, and that's something staff needs to look at. That's something that the council needs to be aware of, is that's a spot where we need to focus some attention. Okay. Moving forward to BEMA. The 2 lowest scores were community preparedness, and the 2 highest priorities were incident response and community preparedness. And so I think that it's fair to say that we probably have a little bit of progress to make on community preparedness at least. All right, let's move forward to community development. It's on the next sheet. Highest approvals were zoning and building inspections, and our lowest approvals were code enforcement and developer friendliness. I don't know that shocks anybody necessarily if you're looking at it from that perspective. And then if you go to the service priorities, obviously code enforcement is the top priority. And I think that's not an unfair expectation, or that's not a shock to anybody. I think that the community wants better and more consistent code enforcement. At least the perception of better and more consistent code enforcement. Again, this isn't necessarily a commentary on the folks we've got working in that department right this moment, but that's a need right now. And so that's something we ought to consider as we're looking at this. Economic development, not a shock that our lowest, if you look at our lowest when it comes to rating, it's the new single family residential neighborhoods. Our highest priority is needing new single-family residential neighborhoods, and again, not a shock if we went through all the ward meetings, and again, that was one of the things that came up consistently, and so obviously that's something that as a staff that we should consider looking into how can we affect that, and we have been. It's nothing new, but as we're going through the budget process, maybe that's something. What meant downtown redevelopment, there were the 3 lowest scoring things were the 3 highest priority things when it comes to economic development. So that gives us a pretty clear marching orders when it comes to economic development as far as where we need to look at resources and where we need to work on expending our efforts and time. And then after that, I think that I just had the highest approvals and lowest approvals listed here. But if you go to what our expectations are as far as priorities, that's why I have it highlighted at the bottom. I think customer service, quality of life amenities, and public communication needs to be the 3 areas we probably should focus on, because those are the priorities that you guys listed. And they also didn't score the highest necessarily, so that means we have work to do. Everybody follow this? Mm-hmm. Any questions or concerns on this? Anything that you think we've misread as a staff, or based on everything you've seen so far?
I was just going to say on the code enforcement, I know I like the way we're going with that, and it's working really good. So they're getting out there and talking to people, which is one of the big concerns that we've had in the past. So I know it's on the lowest approvals, but I think it's going in the right direction.
I think it's fair to point out, I appreciate you saying that. I think it's definitely fair for us to point out that there have been a lot of changes in that area. We've changed this, it's no longer called code enforcement, right? It's called neighborhood improvement. We have 2 new neighborhood improvement officers who are taking a kind of a different approach to trying to bring the neighborhoods into compliance. We definitely are trying to take a more friendly approach using door hangers. We're rather than just the mailers to start off, getting out of the vehicles, having conversations with property owners to try and get them to address the issues before it even gets to a point of needing documentation. And so I think that approach is hopefully going to pay off. I think that hopefully the community sees it, and that you guys see it, and that long term we have some positive effects from it. And then the last sheet essentially was the ward needs discussion results and kind of the ward priorities that were listed there. And you'll find that there were two pretty consistent common denominators in all four of them. Single family, which is not a shock, right? And single family is a need, single family housing, and then continued crime control is always a need, right? And so that's always at the top of everybody's list when it comes to wanting to have a safe community that they live in. So, any questions on this section of it? Just wanted to point all this out for you. The idea of the prioritization is to get this at the top of your mind as we're going through the numbers. So, if you feel like we need to reassess things when it comes to the budget, this is a good chance for that conversation to happen. At the same time, it's also, I don't know if frustrating is the right word, but sometimes when you get going through the budget and so much of it is staff, the discretionary spending on things sometimes is very limited, right? And so the change that we can affect wholesale without changing departments wholesale and changing staffing levels is kind of minimal, but it doesn't mean we can't have any impacts, because we certainly can, and I think that we're trying. So, any other questions on this part of it? Comments or concerns before we move forward to looking at operations and Casey showing you some of the numbers?
I'll just call out what at a glance appears like an inconsistency, but it's an interpretation thing.
Okay.
The fact that water, sewer, infrastructure, emergency response has a super high approval rating, but it's also a super high priority.
Mm-hmm.
That is in conflict with how some other things ranked out, but that, for me at least, was just doubling down on, yeah, let's keep this as a priority. Whereas some other things were lower approval, maybe higher priority, lower priority. So if anybody else besides us looks at these, that's just my interpretation to make it make more sense, because there are some inconsistencies.
I would say that just because something's a high priority doesn't mean it's not going well now,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And so that's the way I interpret that is a little bit, is that's one of those things that it's a super important thing for us to address consistently.
Yeah.
And thankfully we're doing pretty well right there in that, from that perspective, I would think.
You said it better than I did. Thank you.
So, any other questions or comments?
Questions before we move on?
Perfect. Well, you guys have these now. We can probably put, we have electronic versions of it if you'd like, and if anybody in the public would like to see an electronic version, just send us an email. We'll be glad to send it to you. There's not really a spot to put it on the website at this point. I don't know if I want to do that because it's kind of an internal thing, but it's a public document, so people want it, they can see it. And so let me know and we'll get you a copy of it if someone's interested.
Just remember that it's still in draft form too, so.
All right, perfect. Let's move up. Casey, you want to take over?
Okay. To Joe's point earlier, the budget is always changing, so it's already changed since I laid this in front of you. My staff helped me print this out this afternoon, and I was making changes as they were printing and stapling, and so we do have a few changes. Really, I'll just tell you the total changes if you guys want to make a note of that on your sheets. If not, we can discuss that afterwards. But we'll start with the FY25 budget assumptions. For this year, we have budgeted a 2.5% COLA and then a 2.5% merit step for 5% total for all employees. We have a 0% increase in our health insurance premiums, which is a great thing. Carla worked diligently on that. And I believe the max we can increase the following year is 12%. So knowing that increase is already in place, or potential increase is already in place, is a nice thing for me. We estimated 3% growth in sales tax revenues. We feel like that's pretty conservative, and we really want to stay there with the way that the economy is going. I haven't received a word from KCMO Water or Little Blue for their water and sewer increase, but I am going to budget a 5%, and hopefully I'll get something prior to the approval of the budget. But right now, you guys have got 5% in front of you.
Casey, if you don't mind,
Yes.
Greg, 5% is pretty consistent with what they've been recently, right?
Joe and I discussed this today, actually, a 15% increase in liability insurance. I'm just looking at the cost of everything going up, and if one of our vehicles is in an accident, those parts are pricier. So I feel like premiums are going to go up. What we budgeted in 23 and 24, we didn't quite hit that mark. We were over budget, so I'm being pretty liberal there with that expense. Love to talk about it with anybody who wants to talk about it, but that's where we have it right now. Loggers expense has increased general fire and police just a little bit, and those increases are there in front of you and included in the budget. So with that, we'll get started in general fund, and I have my first change for you. In front of you is line item by line item. We're not going to go through that tonight. But I did want to give them to you in case anybody had any questions as we're going through about a particular line item. But the first big change highlighted in yellow there, your sheet actually says 24 million total in revenue. It's 25,025,926. So we'll start out with taxes. And this is, again, sales tax, property tax. I actually left property tax the same as FY24. Just want to be really conservative in that. Licenses and permits. Revenue from building permits are expected to increase in FY25, so we've got $500,000 in there for that. Community development has already seen an uptick in this, so we want to go ahead and plan for that. The intergovernmental line item here for 538,550 includes small grants like MARC, the Senior Center grant, PD and fire, such as a victim advocate grant, drug trafficking grant, and GEMT. And all of those are expected to remain pretty steady for FY25. Charges for services include CID and TIF administration, ambulance revenue, and nuisance abatement fees. I don't know how to use the mouse on this.
It's swinging around up there.
Is it?
Yep.
Okay, oh, on the screen it is? Oh, I needed it in here. Oh, well, it's okay.
Go back to where we were.
We'll go. So we'll move on to the general fund expenses. Again, you guys have got all of these line item by line item, but we're not going to go through those. So we'll start with legislative. There is a change in legislative. So our health insurance premiums, while they didn't go up, the premiums used to include a broker fee in the premium. We now pay our broker fee outside of the premium, and so for general fund, I've budgeted all employees in legislative. So you'll see in the contractual line item that that's gone up pretty significant because, again, I've got all the broker fees for general fund employees budgeted in there. We are not making a transfer to economic development or golf. Both of the funds are able to support themselves right now, so you actually do see legislative going down in FY25, and those two reasons are why the expense is lower for 25. City attorney has increased. We've budgeted $100,000 in economic development legal expenses. We actually did that in 24 as well. Haven't spent any money, but we're putting it back in for 25 just in case.
If you'll recall, we didn't do any bonding in FY24. We haven't done any bonding. We haven't set up any new incentive districts, and we're seeing an uptick in potential activity for new development, which would potentially lead to the new development of incentive districts if needed, and also the potential to bond now that we have, and this is good news that most of you don't know, we have our final 2022 audit report, finally. And so we're rolling right into 23. And so as we have those finished up, then we'll have the ability to go out and utilize the bond market for the expenses that the voters had approved in 22. So
You
we
stole
didn't-
my audit thunder, Joe.
sorry.
Way to go.
I was excited.
I
couldn't hold back.
I know. I was so excited I forgot all about it. Okay, so moving on. IT, we do have an increase in there. We've got a lot of minor equipment being purchased out of that department this year. Garage operations, stock parts are increasing due to just rising costs everywhere. Human resources has gone up a little bit. We actually have 3 people budgeted out of there, where in 24 we had 2.
Just to highlight that, we're not hiring anybody else. If you recall, when we hired our recruiter, it was done in the police budget because it was mostly a police recruiting position with some assistance elsewhere. She's done a bang-up job, and we are anticipating hopefully having our police force filled next year. And so that necessitated us moving her out of police, and obviously we're not hoping to get rid of her because she's doing a fantastic job. So we had to put her back into the general, put her elsewhere. So she's in this standalone human resources department. So
the departments on this slide, for the most part, the increases are due to the COLA, the merit, and all of the benefits that go along with the increase in salary. I will note that fire and police, you do see a pretty significant increase, and that's not from the budget of 24 to the budget of 25. That is not all due to the increase in merit and COLA. For FY24, there were some unfilled positions that we did not budget for, but in FY25, we are budgeting for all of those unfilled positions and hoping to fill them. Other than that, the other departments are pretty much staying steady, and again, increases are due to the COLA, the merit, and the benefits that go along with that. So any questions on general fund revenue or expenses in any of the departments? And we can take a minute if you guys want to go look at some line items. Yes, sir?
The jail increase is
Uh,
700 to 900.
All of the positions. The fire, the PD, and the jail. We have not been able to fill those, and, yep, now we are. Any other questions on general fund right now? Okay, we will move on. Park Fund, they do have a lot of capital plan for this year. They are making the increase from park sales tax fund to the park fund is about 50%, 150% more than it was last year. So that's why you see the revenues going up significantly. You will also see their expenses going up significantly because, again, they've got those transfers planned for capital improvements and purchases that are much needed.
if I can make a quick comment on that, I think it's, we've talked about it in here in the past, especially when it came to the ARPA funds and how we allocated those. Parks had a very, very, almost extra healthy balance, fund balance in both their park fund and their park sales tax fund. And I think they've taken that perspective to heart, and they're using a lot of that money, or a bigger chunk of that money to invest into the facilities, which they do have plenty of needs. So it's not like there's not a need there. So I just wanted to point that out.
So we'll move on to economic development. That's another change. I think at the very first slide it was called hotel motel. I have actually made the change in the system to economic development. So that is going to be the name of this fund going forward. You will see really a decrease in the revenue. However, there's actually an increase in the operational revenue. In FY24, there were some transfers made from general fund. Again, we are no longer making a transfer from general fund to economic development, but their increase in revenue is coming from that 3% sales tax, which we're estimating to be about 275,000 for the year. That's a pretty conservative estimate, but we want to get a couple years under our belt before we start increasing that, so we can see what it's really going to be. And you can see that line item on the sheets that you guys have in front of you. It's Fund 224.
Yeah, if you see the numbers, they fluctuate quite a bit. Total revenue in FY22 is 233. FY23 is 871, but there was a huge transfer in 23 as well. I believe that one was for the purchase of the mobile home park on North Scott. And then there was a big, in 24 we had some ARPA funds that went in there as well. And so that would account for that actual number coming down, even though we've started allocating the 3% marijuana sales tax to economic development.
And we've actually started receiving that already, so we've got a couple months of that in FY24 that wasn't budgeted for. So the cash balance will be a little bit more than we had thought. So the total expenses has gone down tremendously because we aren't doing any kind of big economic development projects like Joe talked about just a second ago in FY23 and 24. And I'll give you guys just a minute to look at the sheets if you want before we move on, unless you guys are ready. Okay, we will go. Next is street. Street is remaining pretty steady. The sales tax is budgeted at 3% increase. And their capital expenses are down from 24, which is why you see the expenses down in 25. There's also a MoDOT grant and the revenue with an expense to match in street fund. 150,000. Any questions on street? Okay. Moving on to wastewater. Revenues are up just a little bit. We've got some new services in water and wastewater, so I did increase the sewer revenue. Right now, there are no plans to increase the rates in water or sewer. That's going to be up to but I do not have that budgeted. I think that we should probably have a discussion about that, but right now it is not in the budget.
Say that again.
Water and sewer rate increases are not in the budget.
You just mentioned them on that first slide, what you're anticipating though, correct?
For
Our cost
for our
increases,
cost,
yes.
for our expense. That's our expense.
We are not passing those along to the rate. In this budget, as it sits right now, we would not pass those expense increases along to the residents and the ratepayers.
But I do think that is a discussion that needs to take place, just so I can have more clarification going forward.
If we want to have that discussion now, it's probably as good a time as any. At least if there's any feedback at the, initially hearing that perspective. Obviously, we have this use tax on the ballot, and half of it we're trying to dedicate toward sidewalk improvement. The other half would go toward a water rate rebate for each of the users. And obviously we have a decent fund balance. We talked about this last year. It's the reason we didn't pass along an increase to the residents this past year in rates for water and so those balances have come down some, but they're still fairly healthy. Let's put it that way. And so I think it would behoove us to try and hold the line for now, even though we are deficit spending again on water and wastewater because of that, because we are increasing the rates. At some point, we'll have to go back to increasing rates again. But for now, I think it would behoove us to hold the line, and then if we get this use tax coming through, then that water rebate will be real. It won't just be, and not that it wasn't real to begin with, but I mean you'll be realized by the user, rather than having like the 5% increase or whatever we would pass along normally from whatever our expenses are, and then you take that $12 or $13 a month off. we keep it steady and we give the rebate when if use tax passes, and that's going to be felt by our ratepayers a lot more. It's a lot more effective. It's essentially bringing, the voter intent through on that. And that would be if they were to pass it, the voter intent would be for that rebate to mean something. And so we would want that to mean exactly what they say. But we're definitely open to comments on that. I mean, we still have some things budgeted, and we still have some debt financing that can take place to help us with some improvements, and we're planning for that and budgeting for that. And at some point, we can't always, eat these increases in costs, but I think everybody in here was very much skeptical about the continued increase in water rates and sewer rates year over year, and I think that the election was a reflection of that. That community had that same skepticism, and so we're just trying to do what the community had said through the election, through who they elected, and what you guys' platforms were. We're trying to be responsive to that. That's what local government's supposed to be about, responsive to what the community wants and needs. And so, I mean, it's not the best fiscal policy to always eat these increases, but if we have a healthy fund balance, then we probably charge too much to begin with, and so we need to bring that back in line.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I think this was out of the, maybe something a year ago, but it was the proposed ending cash for called the proprietary funds, and wastewater and water together was over $10 million.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the reserve you're talking about, and
Essentially.
if there is a increase from Kansas City Water or whatever, we would eat into that, and then reserve the not kickback, but the
Rebate.
use tax revenue to actually give a rebate. Is that
That's right.
okay? Okay. So on these forms, these big forms, I don't see a projection of what the
Fund balance.
fund balance would be after
Correct.
we do all this
We're
stuff.
still formulating the exact fund balances on those, and they will be available when we do the city manager's approved budget. So before you make any actual decisions on this, you will have an idea of what our projected fund balances will be.
Okay. Okay.
I'm thinking how to word this. Do we know what the delta is between the rate Kansas City Mo charges us and what we have historically added on top, what our residence rate is?
So I can find the answer to that question for you. I haven't done that since I've been here. I haven't increased the rates yet, but yeah, I can definitely look into that for like the last 3 years.
Because that's where I see, and I'm not a finance person, just in thinking through how we can avoid using a rebate to do this and reflecting it in rates. If we see that there is a big delta between those,
Right.
would there be an opportunity to not have to package it as a rebate and just say we're getting our rates closer in line to KC Mo's rates because the use tax passed and,
To the increase in the rate, right?
That's ultimately what it would be. We've already approved the ballot language to essentially be a rebate.
Yeah.
So I think we would need to show that
Fair enough.
essentially. But we can make it apples to apples and show how the end rates are going to be effective compared to all of our contemporaries, all the other cities in the metro area, right? And so we could do that's not a difficult endeavor to take.
Okay, thank you.
We might even be able to show that on the bill somehow. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, and
Yeah.
if anyone's watching, it's never going to be the flat rate that we
Right.
pass along. There's cost to run a water system, but yeah, I'd be curious to see because the previous council went a year or two down the road of let's pay for water improvements with increased rates, and
Sure.
we haven't right-sized that if we should, what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Well, and that's kind of it's kind of the hold the line methodology, right? It's like, we had the big increase that one year, and rather than right size it, knowing inflation's going to take place and naturally bring it back into alignment, if that makes any sense. And it's always harder to cut back and then take again from the residents, whereas it's a lot easier for us to just let it ride out and not pass along increases as we get our increased costs until we feel like we've got to a point where we've hit where we have to start passing some of that along. And we're not there yet is our perspective.
Anybody else?
You haven't gotten to water yet, 662, but I was looking, which one of these lines is the charges that we get from Kansas City Water? Underwater. Well, you want to wait? Go
Yep,
ahead.
we'll
Give
get
us a
there.
few minutes, we'll
Okay,
get there.
sure,
We're
yeah,
glad to
okay.
have that, yeah.
I thought we were talking about,
Down, slow
oh,
down.
I thought we skipped a couple
Nope.
of pages here.
I'm still on wastewater. I just wanted to point out the net increase in revenue. There is a grant with an offsetting expense in wastewater for Olson Acres. We are also transferring 1.4 million from the sewer impact fee, so those are some increases in revenue for 25. So we can move on to trash. There are no increase in rates planned there, so we're staying pretty steady. There's really not much to look at there. Now we're on to water. And what were you asking, Councilman Powell?
Well, yeah, I was asking
cost
on these
for water.
lines in
You're looking in the
662.
expense.
Which one is it, our bill from Kansas City Water?
It is,
Probably the biggest one, down there.
I'm gonna read you the number.
2.7 million.
Water purchases, it's
2.8,
Water purchases,
Yeah.
Forty
okay.
52.
2.866 million.
So that's, yeah, it's about a third of our overall expenses.
And just so to give that a little perspective, I'm sure you understand this. I want to make sure the public understands this. Yeah, we're at 2.866 million in our hard costs for water. That does not include our infrastructure, right? So we have to make sure we maintain and continue to improve our infrastructure, or else we're going to have issues with that. So, and everything that goes along with that, right? And so it's not a apples to apples.
No. Well, then I see in wastewater that unless I'm misinterpreting it, there's no contributions out of wastewater to anybody else. And on 662, I don't see even that line item. So are we not doing any overhead allocation? Or are we?
Any overhead allocation?
Well, the overhead allocation in wastewater says 0. There's no line item, well, of course, I missed water, so maybe I'm missing it someplace else, but
Yeah.
If you go
So
to,
if you go
on
to
wastewater,
if you look at
660.
660,
go to the 3105, 3106, 3107. Those are the areas where that would essentially fit.
wait a second, we're on 660, what?
Right, and this is it'd be the same numbers in the 662.
3105.
3105, 06, and 07.
3105, 060.
Find it?
Okay, 3105, okay. Administrative charge, utility building, and public works building.
Remember,
Okay,
those are the
administrative.
terms
Okay,
that
so
were
you
used, that have always been used on those allocations.
Okay, so when we go to the next page where it says interfund transfers out,
Mhm.
then where it was 2.3 million last year, or the
And that
budget
was-
was, then it's now 0 because we've.
that
put it
was
in a different
ARPA,
place?
nope, that was ARPA funds. So last
Oh,
year,
okay, okay.
there were ARPA funds in wastewater, and we transferred those out of wastewater.
To water.
In FY '24.
Gotcha, okay, okay.
So I think are we in water?
We're back in water.
Okay.
We're still in water, yeah.
And you'll see, Councilman Powell, 3105, 06, and 07 again, right, in water. So you're following where with 662.
Mhm.
Administrative charges, utility billing, and public works billing. That's the same thing we were talking about.
Gotcha.
Okay, so water revenue. The net decrease is actually, we are not receiving a transfer from general fund. We did have a transfer of 1.4 million budgeted in FY '24. Those were ARPA funds, and that is not happening in FY '25. So that's why you see that revenue going down in water for '25. You see expenses going down in water because of the capital. We do not have the capital projects budgeted in water this year that we did in FY '24. I do want to go back to wastewater real quick. On your sheets, you actually see us going into the red 1.19 for the budget year. That does include over 1 million in rollovers from FY '24. So that if you go back to 660 fund, wastewater fund, the last page of 660 fund, you'll see that on there. Let me know if you don't see it. Okay. So we'll go back to water. We are budgeting in the red 1.3. We do have about 300,000 in rollover in water fund as well. So we are actually going to be going into cash about 1, but it could be less than that because we do not have our cash balances shored up for FY '24 yet. But like Joe said, we'll have that before we get the budget approved for '25.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
The capital improvements for water for this year, now that we have the audit in and would have more bonding capacity, what's the plan?
Well, do you want to speak to that?
There's only one audit in. They actually have to have a second audit in, and we can't bond until we actually have revenue. Revenue won't be there till '27. So
And that'll be out of capital, we're looking at capital improvement, which is a kind of another discussion we wanted to have with you guys tonight, so. So are there any other questions on water? Okay, we'll move to golf. So golf has been doing pretty well the last couple of years. Their revenue, you can see from '24 to '25 is down, but it's only down because general fund is not transferring to golf in FY '25. And that transfer in '24 was 241,000.
And you recall that 241,000's generally been, that's what general fund has paid for to golf for their capital debt that they've had. And so they've been operationally solvent, but this general fund's been supporting their capital debt. And so they've been, first of all, they've done a great job budgeting and being very good stewards of public money. And second of all, they've had just great years, the last couple of years, and their revenues have continued to climb. And so their fund balances are very healthy, and so we felt very comfortable backing out and not having that transfer this year, and just allowing them to eat that capital expense as part of their own expense for the year.
And you'll see at the end of their budget sheet that we're budgeting in the red 302. However, 115,000 of that is carryover from last year. Or I'm sorry, 100,000 of that is carryover from last year. Any questions regarding golf? Nope. Okay, so we're going to move on to other funds. Street Impact, Markey Parkway, and Mayor's Christmas Tree. Pretty much keeping those steady. Mayor's Christmas Tree, it seems like in the past we've always budgeted 15 and 15. Obviously, we would never spend more than we got in, but there is a little bit of a cash balance in there right now, so. Drug seizure, DWI, and special training. So we haven't really spent much out of these accounts. I think there's about 100,000 in all three together, and I have been having discussions with Scott about how he wants to spend these funds. We don't have anything really budgeted to spend this year, so again, we're going to get together and figure out exactly what we want to do with them. So, any questions on these funds? Sales tax funds, park sales tax, capital improvement, public safety sales tax. Again, we've got about 3% budgeted increase for these three funds. Park is making that big transfer to the park fund. We will talk a little bit about capital improvement a little bit later on tonight, and then public safety sales tax, I do have that budgeted to go to general fund to cover fire and police, some salaries, and some potential capital purchases. Any questions about those sales tax funds? Okay, so this is just a quick summary of all the funds, revenue expense, and revenue under. Right now, we're budgeting into the red with general with 1.1. Actually, there was a change in park. There was a formula error when they sent me over the spreadsheets. They actually have a zero balance budget, so that is not negative 4030 anymore. Economic development is in the black, 9215 for the budget year. Street, 186. Wastewater, 1.1 in the red. However, we do have some rollover, so that is part of that. Water, 1.3 in the red, but we do have over 300,000 rolling over. And then golf course, 302, but we do have 100,000 rolling over. So for those funds, that's how I'm expecting to see at the end of 25. Any questions there? Okay, we will move on to general capital. So what I did here, I just in one column listed the cost of everything that was asked for, and then the keep column, we either kept all of the purchase or just a portion of it, and then what we cut. So we'll just kind of, I'm not going to read everything to you guys. You guys can read that, but we'll get to the bottom and you'll see what the total cost of the ask was, the keep and the cut, and then we'll talk a little bit about capital improvement after that.
Let's give them a second to absorb each sheet, though, if you don't mind, so they can get an idea of what was done. The access control door upgrade was the key card thing, taking that all the way through, and there probably needs to be some high-level discussions by this group and the community, for that matter, on our city hall and city hall annex long term. Do we want to keep investing into these buildings, or do we want to figure out a better long-term solution? I know the public isn't probably very aware of a lot of the issues that we face day to day with the annex and with city hall. We've had plumbing issues nonstop at the annex. You guys saw it in the back if you've gone through the back. We're literally tearing it up again, which will be the third time since I've been here, trying to find something wrong with the the sewer system, and the issues that's caused. And literally the outside walls at City Hall are starting to crumble. So we have some real capital needs with City Hall and the annex, and whatever that is, we need to have a bigger conversation about it. Staff's already trying to explore some alternative methods of funding for those types of needs, and so we want to be prepared to have that discussion fully. But yeah, that's why we took the upgrade out, is because we didn't want to invest too much into these buildings unless we have to at this point, until we know long term what our plan is.
Same theory for the AV equipment?
No, I just talked to Andrew and I said, how much do we really need this year? And so he gave me that number, and that's where we're going this year. And how I looked at it, yeah, we could, if we can purchase it and take it with us, then I'm all in. But if we can't, then how much do we, like Joe said, really want to put in these two buildings? Because right now there was over 100,000 budgeted between the two, and we did cut some of that. If we can't we didn't cut the sewer, but,
Obviously,
because we
roof
do
and
need
sewer
that.
and HVAC are things we have to have, right? So we can't.
Can't take it with us,
can't
but we
take
do
that
have
out.
to have it, so,
Please.
yes.
I want to address a little bit the fire. Obviously, you see a decent amount of cuts there in fire and equipment. I think that was a highly rated area, if you will recall, in our prioritization exercise. And the past few years, they've gotten almost everything they've asked for too. So I think it's just one of those years where we're balancing it out a little bit.
Some more fire and police.
I do want to talk about the ambulance remount. We took that out. The ambulance issue is something that when we can get it, we're going to get it. The lead time on that kind of purchase is pretty extensive right now. So,
It's close to 2 years, right, John?
and so that's not saying we're not going to keep addressing those needs at the ambulance, but if we order it now, we're not going to be paying for it in 26. Let's put it that way. Or FY25, we will be paying for it in 26 is most likely. So it's something we would have in our long-term capital plan, but just taking it out for this year.
And we are keeping most of the police asks, except for just some of the little things. Well, we'll get to the next screen, and were the cars on this one? No, they were on the next one. Scott, I did cut the fitness equipment. I cut the fitness equipment. Okay. Okay. We had that discussion. He seems to think that we'll be okay.
Yeah, the industry has changed so much since COVID that they've continually moved back the purchase of cars. So it doesn't coincide with our budget year. And so every police department is struggling with this. And it's to the point that some cities are ordering cars, and then when they come in, they don't have the money. And then the dealerships are calling around going, we got extra cars. And so it's crazy right now the way that the industry has not, changed so much.
And our intention is to ensure that we have a better vehicle replacement program mapped out 5 years down the road, in addition to all the capital, replacement. And that's been one of the things we've started to tackle with our budget and finance committee. And we'll give that time to work its way through to have a better plan on that. That's long term rather than just giving you a year by year and saying, not this year, we'll get next year. It's better to have a 5-year plan when we're looking at this stuff anyway and say, okay, it's not for this year, but we have it budgeted for next year or the following year and here's the reasons why.
So as you can see, we've got a little over 2 million ask, keeping 1.03 and cutting 977,000. And that's just general fund. But that is the fund that we did want to talk to you about. Joe, do you want to start or you want me to?
We have, what's our balance in capital improvement sales tax? Do you, or roughly where we
About
stand for that?
5.
We got about $5 million in the capital improvement sales tax fund. And if you want to go back, if you can find that slide where you have those sales tax funds, that could be useful for this conversation. Because if you looked at those 3 sales tax funds, the one that we're talking about, capital improvement sales tax, you'll see that our expenses are a lot less than our revenues, right? So that's got the revenues. We don't have the expenses in there. Now, when that capital improvement sales tax was initially approved, it was very specific and narrow in what it was designed for, right? I believe that was the buildings, correct? That was
Yes.
fire, police,
High blue.
and so as those have been getting, as that fund has grown, and obviously the expense that was initially made for those capital purchases, those were amortized out to the point where those aren't going to increase every year, right? Because those are preset. Well, the sales tax has grown, and so now we've got more revenue than what that initially was. Okay, and you went back in 22 and you went and you asked the voters to change that language, and they approved the changing of the language, and the language in the ballot said general capital improvement. So it kind of loosened the reins on that. Now I believe that the discussion was to utilize that for some specific needs and purposes, right, Greg? And so the question is, we're fine now if we decide to do the deficit spend. Do you have our deficit for the general fund? Can you pull
Yes,
that one up?
it was 1.1
1.1 million right now is our deficit. Does that include the change in the interest that we discussed?
No. I'm budgeting interest income very, very conservatively.
Yeah, and we're
So
gonna push
we're-
that a little bit. So if we're probably looking at more like once that's trued up, more like a $800,000 deficit right now in our general fund year over year. And then of course we've got to make sure that we have a 15% fund balance, because that's what our charter says we're going to keep in the general fund. And it's just good practice, in my opinion, that we have our general fund balance that year over year, that we don't have a deficit there. Now, obviously, we want all of our funds to balance and not have a deficit long term. Water and wastewater makes sense because we have that fund balance, and we're being purposeful in how that's being utilized. Golf, same type of thing, a nice fund balance. We're being purposeful for how that's being utilized. So the general fund is, to me, the biggest question and concern. How do we get that to where we're not deficit spending on that? Because that's not sustainable long term at all. And so we feel like there's an opportunity, but it's not something staff takes lightly. So we want your feedback and conversation on this, that we have that extra fund balance right now in capital improvement sales tax. There's over $1 million worth of capital in the general fund we just went over, and so we could use some of that money if we wanted to for the capital expenditures in the general fund. That's a legal use based on the adjustment of the ballot language that took place in 2022. And that's just. But do we want to do that? I just want to make sure we have that conversation in public, because we're not trying to change any intentions or get around anything that the public has approved. We want to make sure that we're being transparent in how we are operating. And so if there is some pushback to utilizing that, it'd be good for us to know. It'd be good for you guys to know. And it's not a conversation we need to come up with a 100% answer tonight. We don't have to approve this budget until March, and that's what we're on schedule for. But it'd be nice to have some feedback on whether that's a good use of those funds for now. We're going to need those funds down the line as we do more capital projects.
And I did do a projection of that, and I can share that as well.
Okay.
And I should have printed this out for you guys. In fact, if I do that, can you run and...
We can get it on the annex printer. So, yeah, we'll utilize that moving forward, and we're going to have more projects we're going to need to do. And of course, especially when we start bonding that money for water, we will be utilizing that capital improvement sales tax to help pay for those water improvements. But short term, this gives us a chance to balance our budget, and we're being very conservative here. We may not even need it if you look at, depending on what sales tax, what happens with sales tax, other revenue sources like permitting fees, those types of things. If those are healthy, and we never spend 100% of what we budget, right? I mean, we budget it conservatively, trying that worst case scenario. Hopefully, we've done a good job of hitting that. But generally, you don't have a worst case scenario, and so there's a good chance we're balanced anyway when it comes to the actual application of the budget for FY25. But it's always good to have that in the black going when you begin the year, rather than just hoping that your expenses and your revenues match up to allow you to be within balance.
So when Matt brings these back, but Greg I think Allison, you're the one that asked the question about the water line improvement, and so we do have, I ran two scenarios, 130 million, 160 million. Greg and I have had multiple conversations about how we do this. Do we finance it? Do we pay as we go? And I'll wait till everybody gets the sheets.
And we don't have to finalize that conversation yet on whether we pay as we go or whether we've debt finance it, because interest rates now and what they will be when we get to that point, we don't know, right? And so obviously the higher the interest rates are on your debt, the more you might be apt to just pay as you go. I mean, we've got those revenues coming in, we've got a healthy enough balance, we could do that.
So what I did, you'll look in the first column is the FY, the cash balance at the end of this, I'm estimating to be 4.9. The debt service that we have for 25, 26, and 27, you can see that there, 1.3, 1.1, and 1.135. Next column over is the revenue, and then the last column would be the cash balance if we continued on the debt track of 1.3 down to FY42 of 3.5. And then I estimated just a 1% growth in sales tax revenue, which I feel like is really conservative. So we are going to have some money to spend on capital items.
Trust me, we'll have no shortage of needs. There are plenty of needs.
I'll be the first to admit, I don't remember exactly if we had anything in plan for that extra money when it was passed in 2022. Do you? I mean,
I think it was for water line.
It was
water line
The
improvement.
conversation was water lines. If you go back and look at our website, I think there's even some stuff still up you could probably find
Okay.
about when that 2022 election was taking place. I think that the intention was, and the public campaign was, that we would have that money available for us to do our water infrastructure improvements as we move forward.
Okay.
And that's not changing at this point.
No.
We're still intending to utilize that for water infrastructure improvements. So we're not running afoul of that intention, let's put it that way.
No, because that's included in the debts, on the debt side.
Yeah, there'll be debt as well, the debt service line. And at 1%, that's extremely conservative on sales tax, especially over the course of a number of years. Now, for 1 year or 2 years, 1% is not super conservative, but over the course of 20 years, 1% is not, it's probably not realistic, let's be frank. Barring a catastrophic collapse of our society.
So yeah, with that 1% and the debt, whether it be, or the expense, whether it be debt or capital purchases, and capital purchases, there's still a healthy fund balance in there, and like Joe said, we've got plenty of need, so.
Anybody?
Want to know what your thoughts are about taking general fund capital and using the funds out of capital improvement to help pay for that?
Go ahead.
I'll have to think about that for a little bit. I don't want to just say it right now. I know we also need improvements on the buildings too. So before we just start throwing that out there. I'd rather think about this
Yeah.
before I give my answer, so.
Sure.
And I am available from 8 to 5. If you have any questions at all, I'd love to discuss any of it with you.
Do you have, man, I wasn't paying attention, but could we go
Uh-huh.
back to some of the things that this could be paying for?
You mean the capital and the general fund that we would
Right.
we would be paying for if we
funds
decided to utilize it this year?
Saying we're loosening up.
Yes. I mean, there are a few capital building expenses and administration for the city hall and the annex.
So right now, we're just looking at the keep because that is the only thing that is affecting the deficit
Right.
budget and general fund.
Yep. And then there's some fire and police needs, obviously, that we decided that we were able to keep in this budget, right? That we didn't cut.
Right.
What's
Yes.
the 100,000 in improvements for fire?
Want to address that?
There was multiple things there. There's an HVAC unit that we're gonna place. We're doing painting of most of Station 2, some blinds for both stations. What else was in there? Redoing of the floors at the old station. The stained floors are getting pretty nasty, so they were gonna, and removing carpet to actually just stain those so we can get rid of carpet. I think that was the bulk of what those projects were.
And they've already taken a little bit of a haircut on that because they'd asked for 131 originally.
So can they give us their ratings of what is 1 through 10 of what they want to keep?
I mean, the fire department, or
Department and police?
I'm sure they
Of
could.
where their ratings are like, this is what we need top, this is what we need.
Well, the 5 through 10 we've already cut. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
I mean, they sat down with us
Uh-huh.
and cut these.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
But this would keep some of them.
Well, we're asking to keep all of these that we have in there now. It's just a matter of whether we want to keep it and go ahead and deficit spend in our general fund, which we have or if we want to try to shore up the
Right.
year-over-year general fund balance.
And use the capital improvement
Use the
sales
capital
tax to
improvement
pay
sales
for
tax.
just the
That's the
keep.
question at
Just
this
for,
point.
okay.
Just the keep, yeah.
I mean, unless you just instruct us to cut something at this point, I think we're pretty comfortable with what we've got.
I just want to make sure that I'm understanding correctly. We are not saying that we want to not do the water stuff that we've already planned out. That is still happening. We're
Correct.
asking if we want to use the excess capital fund tax
Yes.
to fund other capital projects
The
instead of
capital
just,
improvement sales tax fund has grown larger than was estimated as part of the amortization for the buildings that were done, and so that's created a fund balance right now, and that's, so it's a position of strength for us. And so, yeah, that's what we're asking, is to utilize some of that.
and the wording of that said that we can use, it doesn't just have to be for water
Once we
capital.
went to
It's
2022 ballot language, it stated specifically general capital improvement. It did not specify which, now the campaign said water improvements, the ballot language said general.
And we got an opinion from our city attorney as well.
Yeah. Well, we looked at the ballot language and it's just, I mean, it's following the ballot language still, because it says general. It doesn't say, the ballot language doesn't say anything about water.
And we're still doing
But we're
100%
still
of
doing
the
that.
water
We're
stuff.
not cutting, at this point, we haven't cut any of that
Nothing is
out.
being taken away.
Yeah, and that sheet that I gave you, that's 30 million in, and I know that they, I think, approved 60 million, but it's just an example of, because I mean, I don't know that we can do 60 million in the next.
But this isn't
15
the only
years.
place we'd be utilizing funds to pay for that either, right? I mean, there are some other areas we would utilize in water and wastewater to try and pay for some infrastructure, for that debt service anyway.
Unless something unexpected comes up, I don't see any reason to not do it. We have these needs. This is what the voters approved it for. Use it wisely.
How often do we have a negative 1.1 or whatever projection in the general fund? Is that
Well,
typical, or
It,
we
i-
always-
yes, I went back, I think, to either 17 or 18, and almost every year was budgeted in the red. However, there was this cash carryover line item that was included in the revenue that balanced out the budget. But if you take that out, it's been in the red since at least 17 or 18.
We're accounting it differently than they were in the past, and I'm not, it's not a criticism of how they were doing it in the past. We just feel like it's a little bit easier to follow if we don't have the cash carryover, and we're not pretending that we have revenue. That's just cash, that's just our fund balance moving forward.
Yep,
We just identify it as a fund balance. That's how we feel like we want to
I agree.
show that to the public, and so, because of that, now, it shows that there is a deficit spend year over year from the revenue to expenses, because we're not budgeting for the cash carryover as a revenue.
Well, I'd agree with Angela. I mean, we have the money, there's no legal, reason we can't, and I like to see things balanced. I guess the, critical taxpayer might say, oh, wait a second, you always live with a slight deficit, hey, why don't you have a vote to cut the sales tax period? So, I mean, that's the only downside, as I see. We're maintaining this sales tax, revenues are going up and the sales tax same, so the money's going up, and now it's almost like, next year we might be well, we won't, you guys will, be scampering to find places to spend the money as we get more and more. I mean, that's the good
I don't
way of
think
looking
that
at it.
we'll ever be in that.
Hopefully, but.
We won't be in that position. There are enough needs, and then the future, growth of the city and the capital that's going to have to come with that. We're just like every city. Generally, we're going to have more needs than we have money, and we do now. Let's be frank. This is just a way for us to utilize one fund to help us with another fund when legally it's allowed.
So if you have if it's truly, your expenses are all covered and you have a wish list, could you earmark that for a new city hall?
I think that's a big conversation we probably should have. Yeah, I mean, yeah,
I mean, you're in need.
yeah. I mean, there are a lot of arguments for a potential city hall, but I don't want to get ahead of that conversation because we're just not. There's a lot of things to consider too, and there are a lot of needs in the community with streets and sidewalks and infrastructure, and so it's kind of hard for us to say, yeah, let's go ahead and budget for a new city hall when we haven't 100% identified how we're addressing all the others. That's my
Well, I'm all
perspective
for,
now.
though, if you have
Sure.
access, to
Sure,
earmark some of it.
understood.
The capital improvement sales tax, was that originally the funding mechanism for like High Blue?
Yes.
So it's like 20-ish years old?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And it had a sunset, and then they took
Then
the
we-
sunset off in
And
22.
22.
And change language.
Okay.
They broadened the legal uses of the funding and eliminated the sunset whenever 22 on the 22 ballot.
I was here for that. Okay.
Anybody else?
So please get us back some feedback on that specific thing so we can
Time
hone
to
that in. We
let 'em
don't,
think.
again, we don't have to decide that now.
Let 'em
If I don't hear any different, let's put it this way, if I don't hear any different, I'm going to propose that as part of my city manager's proposed budget that you guys are going to get the last meeting in February. I believe that's the 27th. But if I hear otherwise, then we'll adjust and we'll figure it out.
All right, what else?
Is there anything else from you guys? I mean,
Anybody have anything?
Well, I'd like to make a motion. I move that we add $20,000 to the 2025 budget to engage a consulting firm to review and update the general fund cost allocations to the Gulf Street Water, Wastewater, Solid Waste, Park and Hotel, Motel restricted funds. The study should identify the system to allocate overhead and other administrative costs based on actual and documented use of general services by the restricted funds.
I'll go ahead and second with the clarification that I thought this would be included.
We're planning on it anyway.
We have a motion and a second, but they're
We are planning to work to have that as part of this, this
Planning
proposed
to have-
budget anyhow. So, I mean, that's.
That'd be
you-
something to look for at the end of the.
Yeah, I mean, you can,
Federal-
yeah, we will have, I'm planning that in the operations for FY '25 anyway. And so, yeah, that would be in there.
When we see piles of paper next time.
Understood,
Will
understood.
will we see it someplace? Or?
It would be under legislative. I'll make sure that I can highlight which line it's under if you'd like.
I'm adding it right now.
Okay. Well, then,
so.
You're fair, it's fair.
So you, I mean, you got a valid motion and a second,
right.
but they're telling us that they're gonna do it anyways. So do you wanna hold your motion until we actually get the first reading of the document?
And then if it's not in there, you can add it at that point.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They're telling us that they're gonna do it.
Okay, so, yeah, I'll
So hold,
reserve it.
Withdraw.
Right.
so you withdraw your motion until they present the document?
Right.
In full,
Right.
okay.
Okay.
And I believe Councilwoman Lawson would have to withdraw her
I
second as
withdraw
well.
my second.
You understand that, Rob?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, all right.
I just put it in there, and contractual for legislative, it's 430.20, so that line item changed to 128,430.
I'm not even gonna look. There's too many numbers.
Wait, okay, is that what
I'm
it was
looking.
like?
I believe you.
Well, it'll be in there and we
It's in
can,
there.
we can identify it as we get through the, if you want, I'll make sure to highlight it in the proposed budget so you know exactly where it is.
Anything else?
Obviously, this is high level. Is there anything specifically that you feel like we need to make sure we have or address as we hone in the last few weeks of this process?
I'm good at this time. I mean, obviously, we have time to let you know, so if you.
Understood.
have
You've
any-
got a bunch of papers in front of you and a bunch of numbers and.
Yeah. You're on it. You got time
But
to look
again, I
at
want
it.
to, I do want to set, reiterate the invitation that Casey made about if you need any extra education, clarification, understanding, questions, her and I both are willing to sit down. She probably would take the first stab at it, and go through it with you.
I have a quick question, and sorry I don't have this in front of me, but the COLA and merit increase numbers match the park budget, correct?
I think that, yeah, we had the conversation with Parks and I think that we're going to be on the same page with that.
Cool, okay.
Anybody
And
else?
one other thing
Go
that
ahead.
I think it's worth pointing out, we also have budgeted, and this is something I would like for you guys to give us feedback on too, is the summer event that we've done in the past, that we've budgeted money for, that was, I believe it went through Main Street last time. Parks has taken the lead on that and engaged Main Street, and they're working together on this project now, but have asked if we want to continue to put that allocation forward to help pay for stage and musical acts specifically, I think is what they're trying to recoup. And so at this point, we had 42 budgeted last year. We allocated 25 last year. And at this point, we still got the 42 in there in this budget that you guys are seeing right now. So unless you want us to change that, that's still there.
Are they asking for
No, they've asked for the same as last year. 25 to 30 is I believe what Parks has asked for. And so, but we have that money. I'm just saying it was budgeted at 42 last year. We allocated 25.
Think about it.
Give me some feedback. And I'm not saying now. I'm just saying at some point give us some feedback and we can tweak that if we need to. And that can be a point of, in the proposed budget, I can point out what we have on that if we decided to tweak that. I'm just assuming, unless I hear otherwise, that we still want to participate like we did in the past for this community event.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to see us do that.
And just because it's going from outside of our umbrella as a city to under parks and that portion of our umbrella as a city, that doesn't necessarily mean we want to change our commitment to that. Okay, I'll
Anything
plan on
else?
that unless I hear otherwise.
Do you need these feedbacks before our next board meetings with you, or do you want to email in the next 2 days, or?
That's up to you. I mean, my city manager's proposed budget is going to be done well before the February 27th date, but we've probably got a couple of weeks. I would say that, yeah, if you got some changes that you would like to propose, let's
Give me
have
at
that
least a day.
conversation. Well, she needs at least a day, but I'd like to have that conversation
Okay.
before it gets to
You need
her.
to-
Okay,
So,
All right, we do it.
give us a couple weeks. Within the next 2 weeks, please. That'd be awesome.
Last meeting in February.
So by the middle of February, by February 14th.
Okay.
When's the first? Okay.
Fair enough?
Anything else? I would entertain a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We stand adjourned. And make sure you give your little binder clips back to the finance director.
She